China is now running the largest trade surplus in history, close to $1 trillion a year. Every month, hundreds of billions of dollars flow into China from its exports of EVs, batteries, solar panels, electronics, machinery, and all kinds of consumer goods. Hi, I'm Jasper Becker, and I've been writing about China for over 40 years. So, why isn't this export bonanza making ordinary Chinese feel richer? Instead, they seem to feel poorer because all the evidence shows they're saving way too much. This video is going to explain what this means for China and for the rest of the world. So, China is doing something very unusual. It's not recycling its trade surpluses by enriching its consumers or by building sovereign wealth funds, which is what Japan, Saudi Arabia, and Western economies did in the past. Instead, it's recycling its surpluses into creating more production capacity. And that's why China's actions are alarming people in Washington, Brussels, and Tokyo, and elsewhere. The Chinese state is able to pay for the retirement, healthcare, and housing of its citizens. It just doesn't want to. So they have to save instead. The Chinese Communist Party is pouring, therefore, vast sums into building yet more factories and more infrastructure. It seems to want to control all strategic industries, to create a technological dominance, and to amass more geopolitical power. This is what the CCP thinks national wealth means. It looks like an updated version of Stalin's 5-year plans. But China is doing it better, much better. It's become the workshop of the world. It has built giant supply chains, ports, industrial zones, and logistics systems on a scale never seen before. The result is this graph. China's trade surplus has exploded, especially since the pandemic. The country now exports far more than it imports, and this creates a giant inflow of foreign money into the Chinese financial system every single year. Historically, most countries that generate large surpluses eventually channel much of that wealth into higher household consumption. But China has chosen a different path. This graph may be the most important in the entire video. It compares household consumption as a share of GDP. In the United States, consumer spending dominates the economy. In Europe and Japan, it's also very high. But China is different. Despite decades of spectacular growth, Chinese household consumption remains unusually low relative to the size of the economy. Why? Because the Chinese system was deliberately designed to prioritize investment and production over consumption. For decades, Beijing encouraged high savings, cheap industrial labor, massive infrastructure investment, and export competitiveness. Instead of distributing national income mainly through welfare systems and rising consumption, enormous amounts of capital have been recycled back into factories, railways, ports, power systems, and industrial expansion. Chinese households save at extraordinarily high rates, and this is directly connected to the structure of the Chinese state. Unlike many Western European countries, China never created a giant cradle-to-grave welfare state. Hundreds of millions of rural migrant workers who built modern China often lack full access to urban healthcare, pensions, schools, and housing, all because of the hukou registration system. So families have saved aggressively. They save for illness, for retirement, for education, for housing. And those savings flowed into the banking system, where the state could redirect them into investment and industrial policy. But there was another consequence. Chinese households had relatively few trusted ways to store wealth. Overseas investment was restricted. Bank deposits rates are low. Stock markets are pretty volatile. So property became the national savings vehicles. Apartments became pensions, status symbols, marriage requirements, speculative assets, and at one point, property accounted for the majority of household wealth in China. This created one of the largest property booms in history. Entire cities expanded at extraordinary speed. Developers borrowed heavily, local governments relied on land sales for their revenue, and households poured in their life savings. But now property prices have collapsed, the sector has stalled. Here is where China becomes truly unique. Despite weak consumer demand and a property downturn, China's money supply has continued to surge. Broad money, M2, is now enormous relative to GDP. So, where is all this liquidity going? Increasingly, it's been redirected into strategic industrial expansion. China is now pouring extraordinary amounts of capital into electric vehicles, batteries, semiconductors, AI, robotics, drones, renewable energy, shipbuilding, and advanced manufacturing. In sector after sector, China is building dominant global scale. The trade surplus is effectively being recycled into more trade surpluses and industrial supremacy. This is a very different philosophy that we've seen in Western economies. Beijing increasingly treats productive capacity as a form of national power. A semiconductor fab plant is not merely a business, it's a strategic asset. A shipyard is not just giving jobs, it's part of a long term plan for global power. Historically, surplus countries did various things. Saudi recycled its wealth into welfare systems and sovereign wealth funds. Japan eventually recycled manufacturing surpluses into consumer goods, pensions, and overseas financial assets. South Korea built powerful private conglomerates and a wealthy middle class. But China increasingly recycled surpluses back into state directed industrial expansion. This is historically very unusual, especially when it happens on China's scale. To understand this model, you have to understand how the Chinese leadership sees the world. The Communist Party does not care about elections or consumerism or social justice or climate change. It wants to have unchallenged power at home and abroad. It wants to remold the Chinese people. Most of all, its leaders see value in Stalinist ideas of autarky, ideological isolation, and transferring wealth from the peasantry, now the rural workforce, employed in construction and manufacturing plants, to build a great industrial power. In this worldview, economic policy is not about making consumers happy. But China's model is leading to enormous industrial overcapacity. Chinese factories produce more steel, solar panels, batteries, EVs than the domestic market can absorb. So the excess output flows abroad. This is nurturing fears of dumping, deindustrialization, and strategic dependence in Europe and the United States. So we are seeing a new era of tariffs, technology restrictions, and industrial competition. The country is generating immense wealth, but instead of using that to build a welfare state or consumer society, we just see more factories and infrastructure, power grids, supply chains, semiconductor plants, shipyards, and that is what makes China's trade surplus recycling model unique. Other countries are urging China to change, but so far it isn't listening. And how are other global powers going to respond? We must wait and see, but something big is certainly brewing. If you enjoyed this analysis, please like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments below what you think about China's policies.